Scapegoating is a systemic problem, not an individual issue. It's an expression of a dysfunctional system. Think of a dysfunctional family or a dysfunctional organization that does it, or a dysfunctional friend group. A systemic disease is happening, and I'm being identified as the scapegoat. Welcome to Fan Mail, a space where I answer your real questions about toxic relationships, narcissistic abuse, and the long road to healing. I got this question on Spotify from a listener who asks, can you please do an episode on scapegoat children? Thank you so much for this. This is one that's really close to my heart. I've been scapegoated several times in my life, and I really have deep sympathy for anyone who's going through that. So let's get into what happens to scapegoating. I think the first thing I'd really like to have you take away from this is that scapegoating is a systemic problem, not an individual issue. Yes, it happens to someone. Someone is the target that becomes a scapegoat, but really it's an expression of a dysfunctional system. Think of a dysfunctional family or a dysfunctional organization that does it, or a dysfunctional friend group. Scapegoating is a recurrent pattern where one person is assigned blame and there's an excessive negative focus around that individual. And this happens so that the system or family doesn't have to actually face its practical problems. Unfortunately, what is being said about that individual, the scapegoat, isn't true, but it's the family's way to feel stable, to sort of export tension and by holding or focusing on one person. So see this as really as serving lots of kind of regulatory functions. That's the best way to think of it. What it does is it releases tension by focusing on the negativity of that one individual. This is a way for the family to discharge stress, anxiety, and tension. So whenever things start to get worse, like maybe there's more conflict or the fear or whatever is happening that stresses the family, they'll expel it by scapegoating that target. It also creates a pseudo-cohesion in which everyone in the family pits themselves against that individual. It becomes, within the context of that group, an us versus them. The them is the scapegoat and the us is all the people who pile on against that individual. But this can create a sort of sense of false closeness between those individuals who are scapegoating that target. There's also a way for people to put all their unliked or unwanted traits or characteristics, everything that makes them feel needy or vulnerable, and assign it to the scapegoat. They're not bad. They don't have problems. It's the scapegoat who does. So in a way, the scapegoat, kind of just like the biblical idea of it, where it takes all the sin away for the people, it's same things happening in practical experience. The scapegoat sort of holds all the bad for those in the family. They become the defective one. They become the one who carries the shame or carries the blame. Then there's a lot of triangulation that goes on around which, in order to avoid really talking about the real issues, they focus on the scapegoat as a way to distract or to break the tension. What happens in these families or systems is that it's building regulation or homeostasis on the back of the scapegoat, which is really actually terribly sad, because it means this person who essentially is, there's really nothing essentially wrong or different about them. They're being targeted on purpose to sort of do the emotional work that this family won't do. So who usually gets selected to be scapegoats? Well, usually it's either the sensitive child or the truth teller, the person who names things that other people really want to avoid. It may be someone who's a little different. Maybe they're a little more independent. They're clear on their values, beliefs, or they have a lifestyle that doesn't quite mirror the family's script. Maybe they have some difficulties, like maybe they have ADHD or some neurodivergent tendency. Maybe they're autistic or highly anxious. So they have some sort of visible struggle that becomes a cover story for the family's dysfunction. But often birth order plays a role in this. It frequently is the oldest, or it's the second child who somehow is in contrast to the oldest golden child. So it's, isn't that odd? I didn't realize that until I was looking into this a little deeper, that it usually is the oldest child, but it sometimes can be the second child. So what should you do if you're the one who's being scapegoated? First of all, name the dynamic privately. If you approach this directly by trying to change the dynamic by complaining about it, you've already probably tried that. It just makes things worse. It will become a way which for the system to pile on you in even a worse way. But you can name it yourself. You can identify what's happening and say to yourself, they're scapegoating me. This isn't really me. This is a systemic thing. This is a systemic disease that's happening, and I'm being identified as the scapegoat. What helps with that is that you're then saying to yourself that it's not your identity, but rather a system expression, a dysfunctional system dynamic. Second thing you can do is don't get into debates about this. This family probably has a pretty well-established pattern around scapegoating, and anything you do to try to shift it probably will make it worse and a little bit tighter, make it feel more unbearable for you. So watch out that you don't justify, don't argue, don't defend, and don't explain. In other words, think of JADE, Jade. Don't justify, don't argue, don't defend, and don't explain. You may, once you have the freedom, as you become older, 16, you can start driving maybe and have a little more freedom away from the family, but certainly by the age of 18, you can set better boundaries. But think about the ways in which you can enlist boundaries around your life to make it more bearable. One of the things I did is I went off by my own more often. I took long walks, or I hung out in my room. I did things to sort of create space from the family dynamic so that I didn't have to be a part of it. So think about the ways that you can sort of do that for yourself. Create distance from those dysfunctional situations so that you don't have to be a party to what's happening to you. And when you get older, you might want to find other ways to set better limits around it so that you can protect your space and protect your peace of mind. Consider using the BIF method as a way to communicate, where you keep it brief, informative, friendly, which I always like to think is hospitable, and firm. And when someone tries to triangulate you, like pull you in on an argument, just point out that this is really an issue between them and someone else, not really between you and them. So you might want to say, hey, I'm not the messenger. What's going on with your struggle is really between you and mom, not involving me. But also what's more important is for you to really regulate your own nervous system, because this is really stressful. So make sure that you're taking time out for yourself to breathe and get support. Maybe you can find a safe, trusted friend to talk to, or get into some therapy. Maybe find a support group. Keep also receipts of things that help you know that this isn't really you. This is happening within the family, but they're just expressing it through you. So see self-care as part of your way of seeing yourself, validating yourself, but also treating yourself. I just want to let you know that my heart goes out to you if you're experiencing this. It's a very difficult situation. What I've often found is that this is something extremely resistant to change. I've usually had to leave the systems, whether it's a friendship group, or maybe it's a work dynamic, or maybe it's even within a context of a family. I usually had to leave that situation in order for me to break free of it. Because scapegoats have the least amount of power. And so pushing back and trying to change things rarely work, because if you don't have the power to make it happen, then you just look like you're the biggest complainer in the group, which adds more fuel to the fire. So I usually find that I have to sort of extricate myself from the situation. But thank you so much for sending in this question on Spotify. And if you have a question for me, please feel free to post it in a comment section and just highlight it as a fan mail question. You can always email it to me at hello@kerrymcavoyphd.com, or you please use the link below in which you can actually send it to me in a specific form so that I can be sure to not miss it and answer it. And thank you so much for this opportunity to be able to answer your questions on air.